Hi, welcome back to the channel, Michelle, and today I want to share what books I've been reading for March. I want to make this video now because a bunch of my library books are due back, so it's time to make the video before I take them back. So I'm going to be sharing some of the kids' books and then some of the books I've been reading for myself. So first I was going to share some of the books that went with our curriculum, so our read aloud. So these are specifically books that went with Oh Freedom, U.S. History. And I'll link that down below if you want to check it out. So we were learning about World War II the past couple weeks, and we were talking about the Holocaust. And this can be a difficult subject, obviously, to talk with your children about, but I really like the read aloud. I'll put a picture up here because I did have to return that one already. And it was Hannah's Suitcase. And there's also a documentary associated with the book, so they do really go well together. But it's a real life story of these kids' experiences going through the Holocaust. So it's about a girl, Hannah, and their parents, they're the only Jewish children in a town. Their parents are arrested and taken away to concentration camps, so they're orphaned. And then they get called to go to a camp as well. And of course, when they get to the concentration camp, they're separated because it's a brother and sister duo. So they go from being orphans to being completely alone. And then they eventually get sent to Auschwitz and their experience with that. So a lot of the book is filled in from the perspective of the brother. But the Hannah Suitcase is that Fumiko was a director in a Japanese Holocaust museum in Japan, so to educate the children in Japan about the Holocaust, and she asked some of the Holocaust museums if they could have items to really show the children. One of the things they sent was Hannah's suitcase, the things she carried her belongings in, and the children really wanted to know more about Hannah, so she took it upon herself, the director took it upon herself to seek out information, and this is how all of Hannah's story really came to being. The documentary was really great. I think it's great for children to get that perspective of what it was like going through this through the perspective of a child or the eyes of a child. And it was really eye-opening, and it was hard and difficult, but also really important to talk about. I think it was a great resource to use for talking about that with your children. The next one was Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes. So I remember reading this when I was younger. And again, it goes over, it doesn't go over the dropping of the atomic bombs, but kind of the aftermath of it. So obviously her story is she gets sick from the radiation poisoning from the atomic bombs. She gets leukemia. And we went and watched some documentaries about the atomic bomb as well. And so this was a really good book for my kids to read. And for me to remember as well that it wasn't just about the bombs being dropped, that there was serious consequences after that happened as well, that generations dealt with. And there's one, she meets a friend in the hospital. He wasn't even alive when the bombs were dropped, but the radiation was in his mother's body that was passed to him when she had him. So I think really important that these long-term events in history and how they impact things was really important. So what I read for my book club, I'm a part of a book club at my library, and it's adults who read kids' books, so it could be middle grade or young adult. So the book we read was We Still Belong. I'm not going to show you the front because it's an interlibrary loan. It has all my information on it, and it's a big sticker. We Still Belong. And I thought this book was okay. I liked the premise of the story that Wesley belongs to a Native American tribe, and well, her family does, and it goes into that. But she's going to school, and she's in middle school. She's going to school on Indigenous Peoples Day, and nobody recognizes or says anything about it. And she wrote a poem for the school newspaper, and no one really talks about it or makes a big deal out of it. And just kind of how she feels kind of lost in this about, figuring out her identity. So I like that aspect of it. I didn't like the kind of focus on she's crushing on a boy, and I don't know. I've never enjoyed books I've never really enjoyed any type of romance books. I've never really enjoyed the books that it seems in the middle grade era, the middle grade area starts getting about boy crazy and stuff, and I was never that type of boy crazy person, so reading about it, I'm like, and I don't think girls have to change or lose themselves just because they are trying to fit an image of someone else. So I didn't really like that aspect of the book, but I did like the family dynamics in this book. So her mom was a single mom, but she was also a very young mom. They lived with her grandpa and her aunt and uncle. So showing that family dynamics can be different, family situations can be different. I really like the cultural aspect that some people live with their extended relatives, so that's completely normal. And that not everybody has, a mom and a dad, and that's the family structure. So I did really enjoy that, and it does go into some of the family dynamics of that. But overall, I think it did miss kind of the peak of, figuring out who she really is. I felt like that was a really soft landing with the book, but it was still good. Next one was How to Homeschool the Kids You Have, Advice from the Kitchen Table. I made a whole video on this, which I'll link up above, but I think this is an excellent resource for homeschoolers or people maybe considering homeschooling, or if you've been homeschooling for a while. This is really good, practical, realistic information about homeschooling, which I think is kind of missing out there. I think the very pretty, magical parts of homeschooling are being written about by homeschoolers, and there's a lot of, there isn't just a lot of practical information out there. It's not groundbreaking, it's not, crazy suggestions they're giving in there. It's very basic, like be consistent, have educational goals, have standards for your curriculum, basic information like that. But what I really liked is the authors, Courtney Ostath, Jen Naughton, Andrew Campbell, all are homeschoolers. Some of them, over 20 years, but they're also educated. They have degrees in education, but also different science backgrounds and things like that. So I really like the intellectual approach to this. So I found this extremely helpful. If you're homeschooling, definitely check this book out. I think it's one of those books out there that's, a must read for homeschooling. The next one is The Death of the Public School, How Conservatives Won the War Over Education in America, by Kara Fitzpatrick. Now, I randomly found this book in my library. It's in the news section because I always peruse it to, see what to read. And I read the introduction and I was hooked. Now, this is a lengthier book. One thing I will say, it talks a lot. It literally goes about the public school system from like the 50s to current. So you're talking a really long period of time, but it also goes through like every single court case brought up about public school. So if you're not a person that enjoys reading like the legality of things or the courtroom drama of things, you won't like this. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of accurate information, which I really appreciate. And I think the amazing thing is that her ability to bring it full circle, like you really follow the path of public education and to see kind of how we've gotten to where we are, but also the bias that exists in education and how that's kind of become almost dangerous at this point. What I found most interesting, so it talks about charter schools, private schools. It doesn't really go into the homeschooling option. I mean, that's out there, but it's not the premise of the book. But I still found it really interesting, especially since I went through the public school system. So a lot of the court cases they talk about here that changed the course of public education, I was, going through those changes in the same time period. So I was like, oh, is that why my education took a different turn there? So it's really interesting to see those connections. But it goes through charters and private schools. And it was interesting to learn that the private schools were first created as a way because after schools were forced to integrate and have black and white students together and all that, some people obviously didn't like that. So the creation of private schools was actually done to further enforce segregation, which I thought was really interesting and a tidbit of history I never really knew. And it goes into private schools now and charter schools. It goes through voucher systems, all that. So it was really interesting, and the book actually really made me go look into my state's laws, how they handle charter schools, how the voucher system works in my state, because again, we've done public school and we've done homeschooling, but I've never really explored the laws or all that behind it. And the sad truth of it is it isn't ultimately about a child's education, but really getting a certain group of people's agenda across. And it's so much under the table and sliminess and so much not about education that it was really eye-opening. It was really eye-opening to read this, that it's never been about kids, and that's kind of sad. So, but it was a really interesting read. I did enjoy it. I read the whole book, but I'm a person that enjoys the legal part of stuff, so I enjoyed that. At the same time I was reading that, I was reading this one, and this is Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor. So I covered up here where my library information is here. But I saw this actually recommended on a reel. Someone made a post about how instead of, for Martin Luther King Jr., instead of posting quotes on Facebook or instead of, doing that unit study, maybe you should do some more internal work to really look at how you are affecting racism. And this can be a really uncomfortable subject. I think for a lot of people, it's something they would avoid. I am definitely a person that's trying to figure out more of myself, and part of that, we do social justice in our homeschool, and one of the books that, I'll link that up above, that talks about it is Social Justice Parenting. One of the things you have to do is really own your own baggage, which means you really need to self-reflect and think about your own bias, where those bias came from, how it was created, how it impacts your life today, and how you see things, how you perceive things. So it's really important. I really did enjoy this book, and it really made me realize things about myself that I wasn't aware of. And I think that is important because it's almost an unveiling. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, obviously I'm not a white supremacist, I'm not a neo-Nazi or anything like that. But there's still white silence, so people who stay silent in situations when they could be using their privilege or their power to aid those who are struggling in that area. So I really do like how it goes over different areas to work on. And one of the things I like is it's done by day. So you can see here, and I got the large print because that's what my library had. So it goes over like a subject. So what is white supremacy? It goes over it. And it goes how to use the book and all that. So the part 2 is the work. So it goes over every day you have a area you're focusing on. So you and white privilege is day 1, and it goes over, a definition. It really defines terms in here, which I think is really important because, when you throw out things like privilege, people can get all fussy. And I think having a definition you're working from the very beginning is really important. So it will go over in a few pages about white supremacy, and then it goes over how does white privilege show up. So different situations you would be seeing white privilege, and why do you need to look at white privilege? Why is it important to be talking about this? And then it has some reflective journaling questions, which I think is really important because a lot of this is going to be deep self-reflection you have to do, and it's going to make you uncomfortable, and it's going to make it uncomfortable to realize that, it's easy to be like, well, I'm not that type of white person, I'm not that racist, or I have a black friend, so I'm not racist. It's easy to use things like white fragility, white silence, all these things to kind of cover it up. And it's really eye-opening. Like, it's like a fish living in a bowl. You don't know you're living in water because that's how it's always been. And then really unmasking kind of this white sphere that surrounds, at least me as a white person, and how that impacts me, but also how that impacts other people who aren't in that privileged group. So tone policing. So it goes over stereotypes, allyship, power relationships. But I really do like how it's literally you take a little section every day and read about it and kind of journal and think about where you fit into that. And it's like I said, it's very eye-opening. So why do we need to look at this? Because you can begin to unravel it within yourself and dismantle it within the spaces around you. So I really think this book is extremely helpful, and I even tag some specific areas that I think are really important, and something I've actually been able to not only self-reflect with myself, but really bring into my parenting, and that realizing that there are certain things or perceptions I am in fact perpetuating that was just how I was raised in the environment I was raised in, that is, aiding in this white supremacy that I need to be more mindful, and you're not really going to see those things unless you do that deep dive and think about why you see things the way you do and really confront the own bias and sometimes agenda that is within yourself. So it's one of those books that really make you do the work, and it can be really uncomfortable work, but I think it's really important. It's one of those books that's gonna hopefully help you grow as a human being and be more mindful of others. So I would highly actually recommend this book. I enjoyed it. It was rough, but again, it's broken into days. So I think that kind of eases it, and it's not super long, but it's giving you an idea of every single day, something to focus on and self-reflect, and in the end you can kind of put it all together. So I really did enjoy that book. So those are the books I've been reading for March, and again, some of them were heavy. Going between these two back and forth, it was a bit heavy on some days, going from the sliminess of politicians in the public school system to white supremacy. I mean, sometimes they did go hand in hand, let me tell you, but it was a lot like, oh my God, what's going on in the world? But those are important things to learn about. I think those are really important. Those things that make you think and question are always important. So if you have any book recommendations, I do prefer to read nonfiction. I will occasionally read fiction, and I, of course, read fiction books with my kids for the read louds and things, but I do prefer nonfiction books. So if you have any good nonfiction recommendations, leave them in the comments below. Now, thank you for watching.